only a temporary hold-up. They are preparing to take the fight onwards through Sirte, then Misrata, and then finally Tripoli. No one here, however, predicts what tomorrow may bring. Tony Bertley, AlJazeera, near Bin Jawad, north-central Libya.
Well, meanwhile, Libya's foreign minister has been repeating claims that the rebels have been getting help from al-Qaeda.
Go back to your files and you will find they were in Guantanamo, and now they're fighting in the eastern part of Libya. This group lives in the same region. I'm telling you, there is al-Qaeda. This is clear evidence. Their files are in Guantanamo.
Well, the US President Barack Obama has repeated that the United States is still considering military and non-military options in the response to the crisis in Libya. Patty Culhane reports from Washington, D.C.
As the constant gun battles rage, the back and forth for control of a country, and Libyans die in numbers not yet known, the U.S. president sends a message.
We stand for democracy, we stand for an observance of human rights, and that we send a very clear message to the Libyan people that we will stand with them.
But the bigger question for these fighters is how will the U.S. stand with them and when?
I wouldn't characterize the likelihood of further options being pursued as greater now, but we have said from the beginning that those options were on the table, and none of them have been removed from the table.
There's been a lot of talk about this so-called table, so let's take a look at what is supposedly on it. One option, instituting a no-fly zone. That's what the U.S. Senate is pushing for, but the U.S. military has pushed back, saying it would be complicated and would require military strikes. Another option being talked about by some politicians, giving weapons to the rebels.
It would be premature to send a bunch of weapons to a post office box in eastern Libya. We need to not get ahead of ourselves in terms of the options we're pursuing.
The administration says it wants to know more about the rebels first and adds sending weapons is not currently allowed under the existing UN sanctions. The other option, humanitarian assistance. This seems to be where the Obama administration is putting much of its focus, agreeing to give another $15 million to aid groups Monday. Some experts predict that will be the extent of what the U.S. will be willing to do.
It'll lean much more toward humanitarian assistance, like helping the refugees, for example, providing food, rather than actually using military force to attack Gaddafi.
The U.S. president can hear the cries for help from the battlefields, feel the push from the politicians, even in his own party, but in the end, only he can answer the question, what is the U.S. willing to do? Patty Culhane, AlJazeera, Washington.
Well, meanwhile, AlJazeera has confirmed that the French and British missions to the UN are now working on a draft resolution to create a no-fly zone over Libya. And on Monday, the group of 6 Gulf Arab states, known as the Gulf Cooperation Council, also issued a statement calling on the Security Council to, quote, protect Libyan civilians, including through a no-fly zone. Well, Ivan Eland is a defense analyst who has advised Congress for 15 years on military and national security policy, and he joins me now from D.C. Thank you for being with us. What is the practical reality of imposing a no-fly zone? How easy is it, and would it work?
Well, it's a lot more work than people think. You need tankers, you need surveillance aircraft, you need, of course, fighters. And you need quite a bit of logistics, and it will take a long time to implement it. But I think we really have to ask ourselves if that's really the problem. Certainly Muammar Gaddafi has aircraft, but I think they're probably play less in this than tanks and that sort of thing. So, excuse me. So I think really that's not a very good option, the no-fly zone.
Well, let's just reiterate that point. You think that the aerial bombardment that Gaddafi has been unleashing is less of a threat than the tanks on the ground?
Well, I think yes, and I think it's likely to be less of a threat. As your package said, they may even be, some of the air pilots may be deliberately missing. Of course, you can't count on that, but certainly I think the Air Force is probably less of a threat to the rebels than tanks on the ground and that sort of thing, the heavy weapons that they're talking about.
What other options exist then to deal with the threat?
Well, of course, there's weapons, but you could give weapons to the rebels. Some people have said there was a newspaper article today that said that the U.S. had asked Saudi Arabia to give the weapons. So that would avoid the U.S. having to violate the embargo. But I don't know as the Saudis have agreed to do that at this point.
Giving weapons to rebels in the past in various countries has led to problems further down the line, hasn't it? I mean, the most obvious example being the Taliban in Afghanistan. I'm not saying that the Libyan rebels are going to turn into some kind of a force like that, but, you know, there are blowback possibilities from that tactic as well, aren't there?
Yes, I'm not advocating that. I think it's better than a no-fly zone, but I actually think the United States should stay out of this for that reason. I think the way we got started in Vietnam was aiding the one side in the war, and then of course you need trainers to train the rebels how to use the weapons, because these people are not very well trained because they're just citizens revolting against their oppressive government. So you'd have to insert trainers, and of course that gets you more and more involved. And I think, you know, the United States has invaded 2 Muslim countries, and I think it should just stay out of this and see what happens on the ground. I think you know, people's revolutions usually have to depend on the people themselves for the most part, even if they get weapons and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so I think
are you not mixing up two different concepts here? I mean, Vietnam, the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, these were military actions by the United States in order to support one particular side in a full-fledged war. What we're seeing in Libya is a humanitarian problem and the possibility of this turning into Kosovo or Bosnia. It's a different situation, isn't it?
Well, I think my point is that the way the U.S. got sucked into the Vietnam quagmire was initially sending in advisors to advise the South Vietnamese army. So I think there is an analogy there. Yes, it's a different kind of war, but my point is it's the tip of the iceberg. When you start doing this, there's factors that come into play, and soon you're deeply involved in the conflict. And I think we've got to, the United States has to stay out of this. And I think, if for no other reason, U.S. interests are that we don't raise any more hackles in the Muslim world after invading 2 countries. And I think if we want to prevent or reduce anti-U.S. blowback terrorism, this isn't good to get in the middle of another conflict when we're already in Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc. So I think we should stay out of this. As far as me being a U.S. citizen and advocating what I think should be done, I think the U.S. should stay out of it.
Ivan Eland in Washington, D.C. Thank you. Now, in other news, in Colombia, at least 23 employees working for Canada's Talisman Energy have been kidnapped. It happened in the eastern department of Vichada. Colombian troops have reportedly been sent to try to rescue the subcontractors, who are all Colombian. New video has surfaced of the September 11th attacks in New York, particularly the moment when one of the World Trade Center towers collapsed. The film was shot from a police helicopter that was hovering above the World Trade Center site.
It's gone! It's the whole tower!
There were 17 minutes of footage in all, capturing not just the collapse of the North Tower, but also the filling of the entire area with smoke. Only police helicopters were allowed in that airspace near Ground Zero at the time. This footage was part of the evidence that the city of New York